Welcome to Sunny's Mindset Lab podcast. Today we're exploring Tiny Experiments with its author, Anne-Laure Le Cunff. This conversation is about rethinking goals, embracing curiosity, and learning how to live more freely.
Thank you, Sunny. Tiny Experiments came from my desire to help people move away from rigid goals and instead approach life as a series of meaningful experiments.
It's a topic that I think so many people can relate to, that feeling of being trapped by your own 5-year plan. You're climbing a ladder, putting in all this effort, only to suddenly realize it might be leaning against the wrong wall entirely.
Exactly. That's the core tension. We're conditioned to believe that having a clear long-term plan is the only path to success. But that obsession with a fixed destination can often be the very thing that holds us back.
Well, I'd love to unpack that entire philosophy today. I thought we could maybe walk through the journey you lay out in the book, starting with that problem, the linear life trap, and then moving into the alternative you propose, this framework called PACS.
That sounds great.
And from there, maybe we can talk about how this changes our relationship with productivity, this idea of managing resources instead of time, and then how to adapt based on what we learn, and finally, the importance of doing all this in connection with others.
Yes, that's a perfect way to structure it. It follows the natural progression of the ideas in the book.
Okay, perfect. So let's dive into that first part, the linear life trap. Why do you think we're so obsessed with this idea that life has to be a straight line?
It's something we taught from a very early age. School, career, family, it's all presented as a linear progression with fixed milestones. The problem is that this creates an immense pressure to have the perfect destination figured out.
And that pressure leads to what?
It often leads to a paralyzing fear of making the wrong choice. We get stuck in what I call analysis paralysis, endlessly weighing options because the stakes feel so high. And that constant need to stay on that one single right path is a direct route to burnout.
You write in the book about this feeling of your own efforts becoming mechanical. And this came from a very personal place for you, right?
It did, yes. I had what anyone would consider a successful career at Google. I was hitting all the targets, checking all the boxes. But then a health scare forced me to just stop, to pause. And in that quiet space, I started to realize something profound was missing.
What was that moment of realization like?
I remember someone asking me how I was doing, and I heard my own voice reply. And for the very first time, I noticed how utterly inert it sounded. It was a bit of a shock. By every external measure, I was succeeding. But inside, I didn't feel like I was truly living. I was just executing a plan.
So that experience really brings to light this core choice you present in the book, the choice between being an optimizer or an experimenter. Could you explain that distinction?
Of course. The optimizer is the person who is on that linear path we just discussed. They have a fixed destination, and their main goal is to get there as efficiently as possible. They're terrified of falling off that narrow beam.
So uncertainty is the enemy for the optimizer.
Precisely. It's something to be fought against, to be eliminated. The experimenter, on the other hand, sees things very differently. For them, life is more of a game of discovery and noticing. The stakes are lower. Instead of fighting uncertainty, they collaborate with it. It becomes a partner in the adventure.
And this entire philosophy, this shift from optimizing to experimenting, is the foundation of your book, Tiny Experiments. It really feels like a roadmap for anyone who wants to get off that narrow, predefined path and step into a more creative way of living.
That was the goal, to offer a practical and gentle way to navigate life's complexities without the pressure of having everything figured out in advance.
Okay, so let's get into that practical side. If these rigid linear goals are the trap, how do we actually get out of it? You propose a new framework. Instead of setting goals, you say we should make pacts with ourselves.
Yes, a pact is designed to be an alternative that embraces the experimental mindset.
You define a pact as an output-based commitment. What do you mean by that exactly?
It means shifting the focus from the final outcome to the immediate action. For example, instead of a goal like publish a cookbook, which is a huge, far-off outcome, your pact could be write one new recipe every week.
So it completely redefines success.
It does. Success is no longer about reaching that distant finish line. Success is simply the act of showing up for today's experiment. It's about the process, not the final product.
I think this is where the comparison to SMART goals is so helpful. Most of us have been taught that framework, specific, measurable, and so on. But it sounds like a pact is fundamentally different.
It is. SMART goals are very much in the optimizer's toolbox. They are laser-focused on a fixed, often rigid outcome. A pact is built for the journey of discovery. It stands for purposeful, actionable, continuous, and trackable. It's a framework built not for hitting a target, but for learning and exploring along the way.
Let's break that acronym down, because each part seems really intentional. What makes a pact purposeful?
Purposeful means it has to be driven by genuine curiosity. It's not about something you think you should do, but something you actually want to explore.
And actionable?
It has to be a concrete thing you can do, not a vague dream. Become a better writer isn't actionable. Write for 15 minutes is.
Then continuous means it's not a one-time task. It's a repeated trial, which is how you gather data and learn.
Right. And finally, trackable. But you're tracking something different than with a SMART goal, correct?
Yes, and this is a key distinction. You're not tracking the end result. You're tracking the process itself. Did you show up? Did you run the experiment? That is the win.
This all sounds great, but I can imagine someone getting ambitious and making their pact too big. You have a very important rule about this in the book.
Yes, the most important rule is to think tiny.
Why is tiny so crucial?
Because a tiny experiment is designed for your worst days, not your best ones. We all have days where we have no energy or motivation. If your pact is write 1,000 words, you'll skip it. But if it's write one sentence, you can almost always do that. It makes it nearly effortless to be consistent, and that consistency is what builds real, sustainable momentum.
It seems like this whole mindset also requires a different relationship with productivity. You talk about escaping the efficiency trap. What do you mean by that?
The efficiency trap is the belief that we can and should manage time. We try to squeeze more and more into every hour, but time is finite and inflexible. A more sustainable approach is to shift our focus to managing our personal resources, which are much more fluid.
It's like we see our lives as this neat grid of calendar weeks, right? A fixed number of boxes to fill until we run out. Exactly, but our actual lived experience of time is much more fluid and chaotic than that. It's not a neat grid. Shifting from that quantitative view to a qualitative one is liberating. It allows you to realize that your most expansive, creative, and fruitful weeks might not be in the past. They might still be ahead of you, waiting to be discovered through your experiments.
So instead of managing the clock, you suggest we manage 3 core resources. Can you walk us through those?
The first is physical, our energy cycles. It's about working with your body's natural rhythms of energy and rest, not against them. The second is cognitive, respecting the limits of your working memory and attention. And the third is emotional. This is about how you respond to challenges.
You mean like procrastination?
Yes. Instead of self-blame, can you approach it with curiosity? Can you ask, what is this feeling trying to tell me? Managing these 3 resources is where true, sustainable productivity is found.
This all seems to lead to a very liberating idea you discuss in the book, which you call intentional imperfection. It sounds counterintuitive.
It does, but it's a very practical strategy. It's based on the idea that not everything deserves 100% of your effort.
So it's not an excuse to be sloppy.
Not at all. It's about being strategic. You consciously decide which tasks and experiments deserve your A game, and which ones are perfectly fine with a good enough effort. This allows you to protect your most valuable energy and cognitive resources for the experiments that truly matter to you.
Okay, so let's say someone is running their tiny experiments, they're managing their resources. What comes next? You say the whole point of an experiment is to generate data. So how do we learn to read that data and adapt?
That's the crucial feedback loop. The experiment itself is just the beginning. The real learning happens when you reflect on what happened.
And you offer 3 simple choices for what to do after an experiment cycle. Can you outline those for us?
Yes.
The first choice is to persist. You continue on the same path because the experiment is working, it's interesting, and you're learning. The second choice is to pause, which could mean quitting gracefully because the experiment is no longer serving your curiosity or purpose. And the third? The third is to pivot. This is when you make a course correction based on what you've just learned. You don't abandon the whole project, but you adjust your approach.
That decision to pause or pivot seems like it could be really hard for people. We're often blocked by what psychologists call the sunk cost fallacy, right?
Yes, it's a powerful mental trap. We feel we have to keep going on a project because we've already invested so much time or energy or money into it, even if it's clearly not working.
So how does the experimental mindset help with that?
It reframes the entire idea of quitting. In a linear, goal-obsessed world, quitting is failure. But in an experimental life, quitting is a strategic and brave act of adaptability. It frees up your resources for a better, more interesting experiment that's more aligned with who you are today.
Now, a really important part of the book that I loved is that this journey of experimentation isn't a solitary one. You emphasize that some of our most profound growth happens when we connect with others.
Absolutely. It's crucial to remember this doesn't happen in a vacuum. The idea of the lone genius is largely a myth.
Could you expand on that? Our culture really does romanticize that image of the solitary hero or creator.
It does, but when you look at history, that's rarely how true innovation happens. Think of the Impressionist painters meeting in Parisian cafes, or the collaborative nature of modern open-source software projects. We flourish in community. We thrive on shared knowledge and what researchers sometimes call social flow, that state of being in the zone together.
And you offer a very concrete way to harness that community energy, which you call learning in public. It seems to have 3 parts.
Yes, it starts with a simple public pledge. Just telling one person what you're exploring creates a tiny bit of positive social pressure to get started.
Okay, so you've made the pledge. What's next?
Then you find a public platform. This doesn't have to be a big deal. It could be a blog, a social media thread, or even a group chat with friends. It's just a place to share what you're doing.
And finally, you commit to a public practice, a consistent rhythm of sharing your work, your process, your questions, even when it's not perfect.
This invites feedback and creates connections you never would have made working in isolation.
This leads to what feels like a really profound final mindset shift in the book, moving from the idea of building a legacy to practicing what you call generativity. What's the difference?
A legacy is often seen as a fixed monument you're trying to build for the future. It's measured by its scale and endurance, and it can create immense pressure. Generativity is different. It's about the positive impact you can create right here, right now.
So it's more about the present moment.
Exactly. It's measured not by scale, but by the depth of your connection and the value you create in real time through things like mentorship, sharing your knowledge, and contributing to your community. It's an active, living process.
There's a quote from Anna Quinlan you include that I think just captures the entire spirit of this approach perfectly. If your success is not on your own terms, if it looks good to the world but does not feel good in your heart, it is not success at all.
It really is the essence of it. This entire approach is about designing a life that feels good in your heart, not just one that looks good on a resume or on social media. It's about having the courage to define success on your own terms, one tiny experiment at a time.
It's such a powerful reframe. A linear life feels like you're just following a pre-written script. But an experimental life, that feels like you're the one holding the pen, writing a much more captivating story, one tiny, curious step at a time. So maybe as a final thought for our listeners, I'll just pose the question you leave us with. What's one tiny experiment you could start today to make your story just a little more interesting?
That's the perfect question to end on. It's not about a massive change. It's about that one small, curious step.
Anne-Laure, thank you for such a thoughtful and refreshing conversation. This discussion gives our listeners a new way to think about growth and direction.
Thank you, Sunny. I hope this conversation encourages people to explore their lives with curiosity rather than pressure.
This has been Sunny's Mindset Lab. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.